I mean, this is wonderful. Here's what I want to do. I want to particularly speak to the guides. You know, you got a tough job. The world is going to hell in a handbasket, and yet you're trying to take people down for a transformational river experience. So most of the time, you're going to be focused on giving people that transformational experience. But probably one day, somewhere along the line, some client might say to you, well, what the hell is going on? And how did we get into this mess? And that's what I'm going to try to do today and talk about. A little bit different scale, a little bit broader perspective, more like our opening movie.
Nope, sorry, that was me. Go ahead.
All right. So 2 slides like this. Again, I'm going to try to stay with maybe some talking points to clients. Okay, so the Colorado River serves 40 million people. We know all of that. We know, most importantly, that not a drop of water gets to the sea. That's a fully allocated river. So what I want to do is I want to remind us that there's a couple different ways that human society affects rivers. And the most important is not Glen Canyon Dam. The most important is just taking water out of the river so that there's no water left in the river. And so we want to think broadly and say, look at the Delta. The most productive biological environment in North America has been completely destroyed such that there's nothing there. Let's never forget that the Delta, the Dolores, the Duchesne, the San Rafael have been largely destroyed. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then we should always talk about 2 different aspects of how, why do we construct dams? To facilitate the use of water and the consumption of water, right? And so there are 2 things we want to think about. Well, we build them, and so they're just effects because the dam exists. We got a whole lot of sand upstream in Lake Powell, and then we have issues that are how you operate the facility. Those are very different kinds of effects. And the reason that they're really different kinds of effects is that the kind of things we've been talking about that are related to how you operate the reservoir are relatively easy to change. You, as an organization, are partly responsible for why the range of hydro peaking was reduced in the early 1990s. You are partly responsible for the passage of the Grand Canyon Protection Act. You are responsible for many things that you ought to be proud of. As you move this way to the effects of the structure itself, those are bigger, tougher political lifts, right? And then the other issue is putting water back in rivers. And that's its own difficult political lift. Short-term introduction of water just to create a little pulse flow. That's what we did in Mexico in 2014. That was a huge political lift to get a couple damn months of water, right? So think about both of those. Okay. One thing that's really important and that I think the Tom Minkley film reminded us of is when we talk about the whole Colorado River, it's not just the Grand Canyon, and it's really different problems in really different places, right? With the most extreme one being, there's nothing here. This is a river that's half reservoir, channelized, leveed, down cut, pretty transformed. We know the upper basin is a pretty wild and natural place. But I also want to observe the Grand Canyon is stuck in the middle. And from a water consumption standpoint, you have the upper basin where water comes from, and also where it's extracted for upper basin use, and then all the big users down here. And in that crude sense, despite all of our understanding of the transformative power of Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon is just a bedrock ditch that connects the upper basin to the lower basin. And so it's stuck in the middle of that big political power dynamic. All right. Every dot on this plot is Reclamation's estimate of the natural flow of the Colorado River at Lee's Ferry where there are no humans. Okay. And I just draw a horizontal line for the 3 periods of time that we now recognize sort of in the history of the river. Okay, so the main thing when you're talking to your clients is you can say that despite some ups and downs, the average flow of the Colorado River at Lee's Ferry since the year 2000 is 15% less than it was for the most of the 20th century, 1930 to 1999. 15%. That's a good number to remember. And another one is, this is back when the compact was negotiated, unusually wet period, and the river today is 32% less natural runoff than when the compact was negotiated. So simple numbers, okay? The other number, let's keep in mind, is 12.2 million acre feet, which is come back into play. We should never forget that water comes in within the Grand Canyon that adds to the water supply. And one of the reasons why we sometimes have a disconnect in talking about this wonderful place that we care about in Grand Canyon and the guys, the men and women who use water, is they live in a world of acre feet. We live in a world of CFS. We don't quite know what the heck the two have to do with each other. So let's just look. Okay. So this is for a period of time, about 2000 to the present. This is the total amount of water that came in downstream from Lee's Ferry and upstream from Lake Mead. Now, what really matters, the numbers and all, you kind of get lost. But these are numbers that say things like 600,000, 800,000, a million acre feet. So that's sort of meaningless. So let's use a different metric. The annual legal apportionment of the state of Nevada, smallest one, but still hell of a thing going on in Southern Nevada, if you like that kind of thing, is 300,000 acre feet. So the number 600,000, we can think of, that's 2 Nevadas. And 900,000 is 3 Nevadas. That's a non-trivial amount of water, okay? The point is, through the period, it's sort of 2 to 3 Nevadas come into the Colorado River below Lee's Ferry. Even though most of the flow going through Grand Canyon, about 92%, is water delivered from the upper basin out of Lake Powell, there's 2 to 3 Nevadas that come in below. The other thing is, this is the sum of all the water that comes in from the Paria and the Little Colorado River at the Cameron Gauge and everything between, and this is the value of the springs within the Grand Canyon. That's the amount that comes in the Little Colorado River in the Lower Canyon to Peach Creek, Bright Angel Creek, Havasu, all the things that give Grand Canyon such a wonderful life and story. And so we don't have to only talk about the ecological importance of the springs of Grand Canyon. They actually matter to the water supply people, and they are an important thing. And there's sort of a number like 2 Nevadas. It's just the spring flow coming in. So it matters to those guys as well. And one thing we should remember is in the lower basin states by ruling of the Supreme Court can do whatever they want to with their tributaries. And they can do whatever they want to with the groundwater resources. That doesn't mean it's not a travesty to Grand Canyon National Park and all the values we care about. But it means that legally they can do it. And so you could drill all the groundwater wells you wanted to on the south rim of the Grand Canyon and dry up all the springs. And that's legal. Now, that doesn't mean there wouldn't be an incredible national fight on that. But it's just something to keep in mind why you and all of us need to keep extra watch on all of that. All right, so here's another one. In blue is the sum of the natural flow coming out, what would have come by Lee's Ferry, where there are no reservoirs and no humans in the upper basin, plus what came in by springs in Grand Canyon. So that's sort of the natural flow that we want to divvy up. And in red is the total consumption of water in the entire basin. That it's painfully obtained data, just let's leave it at that. But it's the 7 basin states, plus Mexico, plus evaporation from Meade, plus evaporation from Powell, plus ET losses below Davis Dam. When red is higher than blue, we're using more water than came in. And what you can see is, here's the 80s. Couple good years in the 90s. Whoa. Right? There we are today. So let's go through now. And I'm going to walk through a history. But I want to make one passing note to the law of the river. You know, we used to give talks here and other places, 8.23 million acre feet is a magic number. This is a compact. You can add these numbers up. There's a history of which laws, which things in the compact. This is good to know. It's important to know, and let's remember what Pat Mulroy said years ago. The law of the river is whatever we say it is. And as my friend Eric Kuhn said a couple of months ago to me, as far as the compact's concerned, there's only two pages that matter. The first sentence, it says the purpose of the compact is an equitable distribution of water amongst the states. And the last page, which has 7 signatures on it. And everything between it can be reinterpreted. And that's where we are today. Everything's up for grabs. So good to know this, good to tell somebody this if they want to, but not that important. Everything's on the table. All right. I updated this since the one that Charles stole from me, but I still have a typo here. Okay, so in orange is total storage in Powell plus Meade. And in blue is the total storage of all the reservoirs in the basin. So here's another factoid. Virtually all the storage in the entire system is just in Powell and Meade. That's why the story is about Powell and Meade. And the other thing is you can see all the big fluctuations in the total are because of the fluctuations in Powell and Meade. The difference between brown and blue is everything else, flaming gorge, whatever. And you can see we're not really drawing down a lot from that. It's all about Powell and Meade. That's the message. All right. So how did we get into this mess? In 2000, Powell and Meade were basically full. But then we went 7 years in which we only had 1 year that runoff exceeded consumption, and we crashed the system. So the horse left the barn by 2007, not now. It just took us almost 20 years to now declare a crisis. Then we lived feeling good about ourselves. We passed the 07 guidelines. how groovy it is. We've got guidelines in place. But in fact, we had a couple years that were good, 2011 particularly, but we never recovered storage. Now, I fully understand. Would you tell me when I got 10 minutes to go?
10.
Yeah. We never recovered the storage. Now, I understand who I'm talking to, and my heart is with, I mean, we're all in this together. My heart is in this too. Let's realize that the words recover storage is viewed by some people as the most awesome thing in the world. And the other thing is the tragedy of refilling Lake Powell. Okay, so, but we lived sort of in this unknown. We lived on the edge, the brink of disaster. And then what happened? Then 2020, 2021, 2022, we had really low flow years again. We never recovered storage. So there we are today. But the point is, when we talk about reservoirs, sometimes we say, oh, it's all climate change. I mean, let's go back. When you're communicating with your clients, well, that decrease in runoff in the 21st century is a human problem. That's carbon loading into the atmosphere. That's a warming atmosphere. Thank you. That's a warming atmosphere. Okay. So we are responsible. That's a huge global lift, right? But then every bathtub, the amount of water in every bathtub is the result of not just how much comes in, but how big the drain is. And so the crisis of today with no water in the system is partly that the runoff is decreasing, but it's also that in our wonderful democracy that is incredibly messy, the system that exists is not able to quickly adjust to these big fluctuations. And so therefore, we just drained the system. Now, on average, the natural runoff at Lee's Ferry has been a number like 12 million acre feet. Tell me when it's spot. No, I don't want to be excessive here. The runoff, natural runoff in the system in 21st century is a number like 12 million acre feet a year. Total basin consumption in the 21st century is a number like 15. Then somebody looks, how do you operate a system spending more money out of your checking account than you have income for 20 years? You do it by draining the system. Now, one last thing. The best year of the 21st century was 2011. Maybe this year will be better. We keep cranking on using water, and this difference is a number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 million acre feet that is more supply more than consumption, right? So that's how you rebuild the system. We have a gangbuster year. If your objective is to put water back into Powell and Meade, this year that we're having will have to happen 4 to 5 more years in a row. Is that going to happen? No, nobody in their right mind thinks that'll happen. So the only way you rebuild storage is by lowering the red line. That's the grand societal debate. Okay. All right. Let me just do this quickly. This is the total consumption in the lower basin plus Mexico plus Meade evaporation, water used by California, Arizona, Mexico, and Nevada. In the black is the total basin, including Powell evaporation. Total water use in the upper basin is about what California uses. That's a good number to remember. But here's a principle. Water that's used in the upper basin doesn't go through Grand Canyon. Water that's used in the lower basin goes through Grand Canyon. There's a reason why Grand Canyon's got more water than it knows what to do with, and the Delta has 0. That's because the Grand Canyon is upstream of the lower basin. The delta is upstream of everybody, is downstream of everybody. So keep in mind these debates that say, oh, the lower basin needs to use less and less and less. And of course, that sounds politically correct, except know that there's an implication for Grand Canyon. That's less water going through Grand Canyon to get water to the lower basin. Thank you. Okay, so just know there's an insidious implication to everything. Let me just say, ag uses about 70% of the water in the upper basin. It's all about growing alfalfa. It's not about Denver and Salt Lake City. Okay, and then Charles has talked about how the ecosystems are adjusted to temperatures and that we release warmer water into Grand Canyon as PAL gets lower. The other thing that's implicit in Larry's talk and Charles's talk is that you heard that there's no ecosystems in the Colorado River that are the ecosystems of John Wesley Powell. The ecosystems are all novel ecosystems, all adjusted to having dams. The scary thing is that means we have to play God in deciding what kind of ecosystems we want, if we care about that. Water consumption. In red on every one of these hydrographs is the average flow of these rivers in the early 1900s. In blue is the average hydrograph in the 21st century. Needless to say, there's nothing in the Delta. We've destroyed it. Look at the San Juan River, a culprit of climate change and water consumption. Don't ever forget about water consumption. And we've hammered the Duchesne. Okay, lastly, the Southern Colorado Plateau is the centerpiece of the river system in terms of its grandeur. Continuous Park Service control on one bank or the other between the northern edges of Canyonlands National Park and Davis Dam. What we need is we can't just think about the Grand Canyon. We have to think about a coherent vision for the whole thing that needs to be internally consistent. The returning rapids guys celebrate that Powell is low, that rapids are coming out, that the river is being rejuvenated. The Glen Canyon Institute celebrates the fact that Cathedral in the Desert is coming back. At the same time, others bemoan the fact that Powell is low and releasing warm water, non-native reservoir fish in the Grand Canyon. You can't have both. We have Pierce Ferry Rapid. Our projections of the future under a reasonable continuation of the millennium drought is that Powell and Meade will never again on average be more than half full. We have to decide as a society whether that water should be stored in Meade or Powell. And there are ecological implications for either one. People will vehemently disagree. But unless we as an environmental community decide what we want in a coherent vision that doesn't have Grand Canyon interests warring with people in Moab who want to return those rapids, we don't have anything. And we will be marginalized as a community. And so look at all these darn issues that we need to think about. The value of ecosystems in the Lake Powell inflow area. You know, the poor Park Service worries about these other things that probably few of us worry about, at least houseboats, but there's a value of things popping out, right? And then we have the Glen Canyon tailwater, and whether or not we should give up on even trying to have a tailwater fishery for trout, or whether we got to fight to the death to get it back. Grand Canyon is a transforming ecosystem, as my friends have talked about. And the question has to be, do you want to hold on to the ecosystem of the last 50 years related to a full Powell? Or do you want to celebrate something different? And that's over a beer, Lake Mead inflows. But my point is, we will always be marginalized as a community if we don't speak with one voice. And to speak with one voice, we have to speak between those in Grand Canyon, those focused on the inflow areas of Powell. Whether we want water in one place or the other, we're not going to get it all. And we need to have a voice and we need to participate. The climate is changing, the runoff is declining, political decisions are being made for the future, the agreements are being renegotiated, management response is going on, reservoir operations will change, which will change the ecosystems, and we will have to decide what we want. And if we don't, others will make the decisions. Thanks.
You have 5 minutes for questions.
Few questions.
We have about 5 minutes for questions because we knew there would be some.
Well, it's a little bit flippant. No, hold it. I did not say that. I quoted Patricia Mulroy, who is, one of the one of the grand dams of water buffaloes. It is to say that we have the compact that says, 7.5 million acre feet. We have that. We have the Boulder Canyon Project Act. We have a Supreme Court ruling. But creative interpretation of almost all parts of those laws is now underway. And so it's an immensely heavy lift to make those changes, but that is exactly what's going on in small closed door rooms, in private conversations amongst these decision makers. And it is your job to clamor on the outside of those closed doors to tell people what you want. But when you're told, oh, we can't do that, these guys are changing the rules left and right. Is it hard as a political lift? Yes. But everything's on the table. And those quotes I gave you are from, it only matters, equitable distribution. Everybody agrees to it. Those are highly reputable people who were part of the water buffalo community. Yeah. Just don't view your old interpretation of the law of the river as a straitjacket. Don't go into this thing and say they need to be giving this 8.23 million acre feet every year. No, that's all out the window. Yeah.
Any format of a website or something to send people to where folks are?
No, Pete Lefebvre is here. Pete, raise your hand. Bago is here somewhere. Bago helped start Returning Rapids. But no, we desperately need to have that conversation. We're really undercutting ourselves when we have a world of Grand Canyon environmental concern and a world of we're going to celebrate what's coming out of a draining Powell. And the reality is you guys have way more power than they do. But the other side is those guys have a compelling emotional story, which gets into the New York Times, New Yorker, God knows how many, TV shows, right? I mean, it's a compelling story, but that conversation is not underway. And whoever it is, whatever organization, the Trust, American Rivers, any number, I mean, Glen Canyon Institute's been at this a long time. Unless people get on the same page, collectively, all you're gonna get are little bits and pieces. They're gonna negotiate all the big stuff, but the biggest issue you gotta be clear on is, do you care whether the water is preferentially stored in Mead or Powell? That is the biggest issue you need to come to terms with. And largely, I think the environmental community is just taking a dive on it. And obviously, my heart and soul is at GCMRC and the controlled floods. And I mean, a huge part of my life is all of that. But in another way, that's the little stuff that's important for this year's sandbars. I mean, it's critically important. But the bigger stuff for the next 10 to 20 years, where's the water going to be? Powell and Mead. As these guys cut agreements on how to reduce consumption, then the thing you need to worry about is which of those two reservoirs do you want it to be? I'll be around drinking. Yeah, anyway.
He's done. He's
I
done.
can't tell you, I started doing research 1984. Tom Moody was the first boatman I went down with, when I knew nothing about the Colorado River. My heart and soul is in this place, and I've been lucky enough to work here for 40 years. And so I'm sharing you this because I care. And if we think about bigger picture, you guys can be the big force that you've always been at the key moments we need. So thanks.
Thank you.